Welcome to Solink in the Cloud, where we are talking to industry leaders about topics that matter. I'm Kathy Langley, Senior Leader of Asset Protection with Solink. Solink's mission is to protect people, patrons, and profits, which is why we're bringing together thought leaders within the loss prevention, asset protection, and retail security industries to share their expertise and passion. Thanks for joining us. And this is a part two of a podcast that Ann Sullivan, who is the managing partner of I Own Your Brand, and I did a while back, and it's on CCTV. And Ann, when we ended that podcast, that part one, we left with the question, when you think about all of the CCTV programs you've built in your career, what was your proudest moment? And I'm going to say probably most memorable moment of building an ROI with a CCTV program.
That's a great question. I would have to say the one that stands out the most was when I took over safety and risk for a very large company and integrated it into loss prevention. And after 18 months, we had a $53 million book of workers' comp on the book. So losses of workers' comp. After 18 months, our standard actuarial reduction per quarter was minimum $1.3 million. And that was
1.3, sorry, 1.3 for a quarter.
Per quarter.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had it right. Okay.
Yeah. And it was unheard of. That was like the turning point of a loss prevention department becoming a cost center to an actual profit center. And I mean, it was just a highlight of everyone.
I bet. So you talked about, you were the head of asset protection, but then you took risk and you joined it in. So how difficult was it to build those synergies? Because I'm thinking cross training, making
Sure.
executives or AP professionals into risk professionals.
Absolutely. So I already had probably the most talented, I was blessed with the most talented loss prevention professionals out there. And so ensuring that they were cross-trained to understand how truly risk is a loss. So safety is your proactive approach. Make sure people don't get hurt. Risk takes over when people get hurt or there is a loss to the company. And when you think about loss prevention, that's truly what their world is. And so many people think it's about the fraud and the security, but really it's about protecting the company from loss. And so once we merged the three groups and let them understand how helpful they could be to each other. So your ROPMs are in your restaurants, they're physically there touching, where your risk and safety folks generally are just doing, trainings on occasion. So when we started merging both of them into each other's worlds, you had during the training safety talking about loss prevention. And when the teams were inside the restaurants, they were partnering with safety and risk to say, what could we investigate? And it truly started flipping rocks and turning bigger, losses for the company and bigger savings for the company when you're able to hold people's hand and say, this is why we do this way. And this is what the true impact is. Right. And when you pull an actuarial change of 1.3 million to 1.8 million, you're high-fiving all over an office. I'm going to tell you now.
Yeah, I bet. So, and even so you were in a scenario where you said, okay, I'm going to train my AP team to understand risk, and you made them into one team, right? You trained, you cross-trained and developed them. But even if I'm not in that scenario, maybe there's already an established risk management department, right? That's probably when we talk about, and ultimately this podcast for the listeners is about taking your CCTV program and turning it, and in your words, and from a cost center into a profit center. So, really that risk management group, I mean, we're going to talk about, lots of opportunities here, but risk management is probably one of my biggest wins.
Yes.
From a cost reduction standpoint.
Absolutely. 100%.
I was the other day a scenario came up, and when we were really talking about video retention, right? When you think about, in some cases you may not have that slip and fall reported, yes, right? For 90 days, because if I'm going to commit fraud, I generally know that you may not have data, video, also data, right, for that long period of time. So video retention with your risk management partnership is going to be a critical piece. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And that's where it comes into building those partnerships. You know, you have an asset protection department and a risk department, and many of the times they're working in silos. But when you can get those two leaders to come together and show how they can benefit and validate each other, I mean, it's just the sky's the limit, honestly, on being a true, asset to the company.
Agreed. So, and again, these are in no particular order, because obviously for any of the listeners, whether you're a financial institution or childcare, a place of worship or a retailer, restaurant, etc., you all have your losses are different and unique, and the opportunities are different and unique. But let's talk next about operations. They're usually one of your, the strongest AP partners, because we as AP executives need them, right?
Yep.
The chain of command often goes up, to operations. So give me an example of two of when you partnered with an operation department to bring value.
Okay, so one of the things is building your team. So many times when I start with a company, loss prevention is the gotcha. That's just their history. It may not be your department, but it's their history. And so it's building a team to show we're not there for gotcha. I mean, honestly, if you're an RLPM that's just after the notch on the belt, you're old school and 20 years out. That's the way it is. You want business people. And so when you go to an operator and say, hey, I'm here to help you, let's help each other. So I want you to share, take a look at the cameras. Let me show you how to use your cameras, because you can increase sales by just doing this. You can reduce your service times. You can improve your productivity by understanding why sales were low. It's not necessarily because, H&M opened on the corner. So once you show them that, you start feeling like a partner to them. And then what you tell them is, when you're looking at the cameras, if you see something that just doesn't look right, now you reach back out to me, your asset protection partner, and let me see why it doesn't look right. That way you keep everybody in their lanes while leveraging great technology, and you just start, flourishing from there. Because when you have a win, people talk about it. They don't always talk about the losses, but they talk about the wins.
And I think, you mentioned the why several times in that explanation there. And I think oftentimes our data and our metrics show us what's happening, right? What's going up, what's down, where am I, where am I leveraging? I should say leveraging more of, basically the data is a leading indicator, but the video oftentimes gives you the why behind it.
100%.
I think that's critical. So let's talk then about, so we talked about operations, and a piece of operations is really productivity, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And labor. When you think of productivity / labor, do you have a scenario where you have built an ROI, or even just partnered with somebody and said, this is how we can utilize our program?
100%. And it really falls back to that why you mentioned. When we get a call and say, hey, we bought analytical cameras, but we're not getting the bang for the buck with them. Okay. And don't get me wrong, analytical cameras are great, but they have flaws. I mean, they're a technology. So, when you have people counters, if somebody decides they wanted that water and they back up and cross the line and then back forward, it counts as 2, but it was really just 1 who wanted a water. Silly things like that. They held a door for someone and it made it look like 4 came in when only 1 came in. And then you'll get where you have the analytical that works and says, hey, your service is too slow. Well, what's a lot of times with the higher ups, I call them the folks in the bleachers, the corporate folks, they look at it and go, hey, service is too slow. But we never look to see, why is service too slow? Did we have a problem that a cashier called off, so we're running on 1 cashier? Did we have more sales that were paying cash and not using the app? Did we have an issue in the restaurant where, produce wasn't made up, or in the, retail environment where your cash line just wasn't running efficiently because the floor was too busy and they were handling the fitting rooms? Understanding the why can change everything. It also can keep a corporation from bringing morale down in a location.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And even, you talked about, all of the scenarios where, there could have been something challenging happening, right? I've had multiple people call off.
Yes,
There's something wrong with some kind of system, processing, et cetera. And all of those, going into that with knowledge, instead of, the finger pointing, right? You're not producing enough. Goes back to something we chatted about in our last podcast was, how much does it cost to hire and train employees? And
exactly.
the cost of my turnover. So anyways, so let's talk next about facilities. And I
Mhm.
think, if I'm not mistaken, on our first podcast, we talked a little bit about energy management and things, but sometimes we don't think of facilities, other than just spot checking, floor cleaning. I think we chatted about that, but let's talk about overall, like, what are some of your clients doing with leveraging their CCTV for the facilities partnership?
Okay, so we have a few of them. Almost all of our clients have moved to putting cameras in coolers and freezers for the risk management reduction. But in addition, we've also moved to putting cameras outside of coolers and freezers and on self-cleaning ovens so that they have a shot of them. They know what time these things, the oven self-clean. In addition, when there is a call that, hey, my cooler is not reaching its temperature or it's falling, in temperature, the facilities team can go in and just verify that the cooler was actually closed before dispatching, a $279 to start service call. And we've seen a huge reduction in cost there. Huge.
Yeah, think about, sometimes you think about that, the time, so you're just really going in, doing a motion search and going, okay, boom, here it is.
Yeah,
I'm talking a minute.
it's less than a minute. You just put that line on that door, the top of the door, and you don't even pick up motion for people walking by.
Right.
Another one, it's not facilities, but it's cameras in the coolers. I know everyone's got the should we put them, shouldn't we put them? We have for our companies with cameras in the coolers, over a 50% reduction on slip and falls in the coolers.
Let me just repeat that.
Over
Over
50%.
50% reduction of slip and falls
In coolers or freezers.
in coolers or freezers when you have cameras.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that also, when I think about not only just the camera in the freezer, but when you think about, I think the last time we talked about data from a POS perspective, right?
Mhm.
But if your CCTV program has the ability for any data, any API data coming in, when you think about bringing in temperature control.
Yep.
And I mean, you have multiple things. So restaurants, obviously, huge loss there. But I also think of those pharmacy refrigerators that have
Absolutely.
$5 merchandise.
100%.
So I mean, that's another, and ultimately that would really be considered a facilities partnership too. Any of their temperatures, any temperature control.
Yeah, and there's a twofold on that though. I have one client that has since moved to, after they had asked us to do temp checks because of the health department, realizing their holds were not correct. And they've actually moved to putting APIs in through their camera system for when they do the temp checks, and we can actually pull up when. So there's no search anymore. It's when, and ensuring that they're checking all of them. And I have horror stories on temp checks when we started doing video temp checks for people who were using these softwares that they bought. I mean, just all these softwares they spend six figures on. And you find out the person's putting the thermometer in a glass of water and just click, 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 click.
Yeah, when you talk about partnerships and
Down the iPad. And I mean, this one.
So when you talk about, I may have lost you there for a second. I'm not sure. Can you hear me okay now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. When you talk about food safety, ultimately, right? Like
Yep.
when we talked before about the brand, right? Eye on your brand, protecting the brand. Imagine, the challenges in a food safety program, cold chain, managing that whole process through. And the benefits of having, to your point, your temperatures in an API and then video validation.
Correct. So that's just another way of utilizing your temps. I do want to, Kathy, if we get back up one more time on the facility side, because I've got an amazing story. We received an alarm, a video alarm, through a client who's using both ADT and Solink video. Okay. And it's not to say that, panel alarms are bad or anything, but what ended up happening is we received a call that through from a restaurant of Solink operator actually saying, I don't know what I'm seeing, but it doesn't look right. And so the call had actually forwarded into one of my team. They didn't answer. It came to me. I pull it up on my phone and it either looks like, I thought it was actually smoke. Okay. I knew it was either smoke or possibly steam. It ended up a hot water pipe burst in the hot water tank. And so it was sending steam up, into the camera, which looks like smoke at times. So I had them dispatch the fire department. Now it didn't show up on the panel alarm because it didn't pick up as motion. It was just basically steam, because it was on the floor. And so we dispatched the fire. The fire was there. They were able to get in the restaurant. They were able to shut off the pipe. And the positive about that was my company also handles risk for this department. It ended up being a $6,600 that did the cleanup. Told us had it gone on from 2 a.m. to restaurant opening, it would have been in the six-figure range.
Wow. Tell me again, the dollar amount.
So it ended up being around $6,600 for the water cleanup and the damage. Had the cleanup company told us, had it been able to go on from, it was around 2 a.m. when we received it to the 7 a.m. when the restaurant opened, it would have been in six figures.
Wow. And that was discovered through an alert, you said.
That was discovered through alarm monitoring, visual alarm monitoring. Okay. But since that, the company is now installing flood API detection, water detection in their restaurants to give that alert.
That's interesting. And it is amazing. I mean, obviously you and I have been in the, I'm going to say obviously, but in the business for a while now. And back in the day, right, your CCTV they were just cameras.
Yeah.
They were just cameras. You didn't, and then, you started syncing to video, data, POS data. And then you started being able to see them remotely. And it's just like, but in the last several years, the technology is just unbelievable of taking any pieces of data, right? Alarm, exit obstruction, et cetera. All of those things combined into, and it's really never, I mean, this is, I'm going to say a timely podcast, because there's never been a better time to take your CCTV program and turn it into a profit center.
100%. And it doesn't matter, what system. You can always take even the most basic system and start leveraging it to show what it can do to get the money to go up to the next level, and then show what it can do. The sky's the limit. If you can think it, you can figure out how to do it. It just takes some time and effort. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So we talked about facilities and food safety, operations, and productivity / labor. So let's chat about marketing.
Marketing, yeah. There's so many ways. We teach marketers in companies how to leverage cameras all the time to see if their signage is up, is it placed right? A lot of folks are looking at, analytics. And again, I'm not against analytics. It's just what you do with the data is always a challenge. You have to have people who understand the data and how to use the data. But I'll give you, for one of our clients who's a large coffee company. We do a lot of reviews for them because they want to know, hey, we have these shelves over by, the doors, and we have some in the back of the coffee shop, and we want to look at products. We want to know what's, moving, are customers just looking at it, putting it down, etc. Well, the nice thing about it is, yes, your analytics can tell you when someone stops. They can even tell you if someone touches it, but they can't tell you the why they didn't buy it. Or in some cases, if they bought it. Okay. And the reason for that is because sometimes if someone picks it up and they happen to turn towards the counters, it looks like they put it back down, but they may just be turning and walking out of the store. And this goes in retail too, for the front tables with ORC. So one of the things we can leverage it with is we take the POS data, you just input an easy search line of that product or that SKU number, or that cost even, if it's not ringing properly. And then you do a smart search on the actual shelf unit to understand, did it go down like the POS says it did? and you are able to give clear, definitive lines that, yes, this is the type of person that bought it. This is the type of person that looked at it, but put it back down. And this is the type of person that left with it and didn't buy it. And this is what your losses were. So you should probably move this product a little further into the location, because your teams aren't able to watch it during these times. There's so much, and I'm only giving you a high level of data you can pull.
Right. And I was just going to say, so without what I consider maybe true inventory data, right? Everything coming in, receiving, coming in, sales, going out, returns, et cetera, et cetera. Without that, you're still saying, I'm doing a search. I'm just going to recap here. I'm doing a search on the item number. I see all of the POS transactions, and then I'm doing a motion search where the product is placed.
Yep.
And taking that and again, this is a targeted review, right? This is an item I have issues with. I know I have shrink, and therefore I want to study to know, am I making a decision in my product placement? Is there a new planogram, for this particular item that ultimately would save? Yeah.
I can give you a silly one that none of the marketers, probably even the producers, didn't even think of. So we have a coffee company that's got a coffee press that it's not meant to, but it legitimately looks like a big, like Mickey Mouse. Okay, I mean, it really does. It's the way it's formed. It looks like at first glance like a Mickey Mouse. And so where they had it on the show, noticing it, they were walking by, but kids, for whatever reason, were picking this out. Yes,
you froze. So start back with Mickey Mouse again.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So, but it really does look like a Mickey Mouse, at first glance. And so one of the things was, when we did the analytics on this, because they were having it moved around according to their analytics, people were touching it, but people weren't buying, very few were buying it. And so when we actually did the review on it, we found the people who were touching it were actually kids who were seeing it and then showing it to mommy, who was then at times buying it. So the placement they decided to do was drop it down to the bottom shelf, and legitimately their sales went up. As silly as that is.
I mean, I know why you said that's a silly example, but when you think about it, that is like, I mean, that's, product placement 101, right?
Yeah.
And it is interesting that it's something kids are attracted to because it looks like, Mickey. Right. That is great.
But the parents were missing it, the adults. So it just silly stuff like that. I mean, I have others with a very high-end restaurant who put in place pairing of wines. And, none of their wines are under $80, a bottle. And they told their servers, that they want them to use the pairing to say, hey, this wine would go great with that. Well, it didn't move it wasn't improving the wine sales. And so they asked us to look at it to see why. Well, the reason being is because they weren't doing it. And so once we started showing, we didn't actually show, hey, they're not doing it. We showed the ones that were doing it. And it changed. I mean, as soon as our report came out the next weekend, they were up over the 60% range in actual purchases of wine, because now everybody was doing wine pairings.
Yeah, and that ultimately is, that root cause discussion, right?
The why.
Right. Why is this happening? And then how do we train, mentor, coach in order to get the results that we ultimately want? And to your point, we asset protection, loss prevention departments are well beyond the, I got you, I'm just looking out for bad guys. We are the business partners, and, these programs are just one of the many ways to build those synergies and those partners. So I have one more to talk about, and you may have something that I missed, but what about crime support? Now that's true, security, but when you think about, the ability to support law enforcement with my CCTV program, what's some of your thoughts on that?
So we get quite a few of them, and a lot of them are for crime support that honestly didn't impact the actual location, whether it be retail, warehouse, whatever. They just happen to see that, the building has cameras and need the support. And so, obviously with the legal departments, we follow strict protocols on what's released, what can benefit, what can harm a company. But I will tell you, we've had some really, really interesting cases. I know all of the establishments, especially in the quick service and higher end food service industry, are being hit across the US by these groups that are just smashing the window. They run in, they, hit your place for 2 minutes and they're out. And, the damage done is obviously more than the loss most of the time.
Absolutely.
One of the things that they have found, though, is unfortunately because of either the lack of cameras. In many cases, it's the lack because they're hitting smaller shops at many times. They don't have a system in place. The systems aren't functioning or the placements are incorrect. We had a very large one that I know many of my partners in the industry are following, and they had hit many. You can Google in the Chicago area. We actually had a location that we were able to leverage the camera system to the point of where the police were like, we can't even believe this technology. And we were able to obviously get inside the restaurant, but we were able to identify outside where the cars came from, where they went to, what streets they crossed under public cameras, so that the police could zero in on the cameras to identify that this was a group that was stealing the cars at the airport and how they were exiting, in turn running it through using airport security cameras to actually track these folks down. And they were multi-state, ring. And so it's just understanding your placement, where it is. And while granted, that doesn't really benefit, the company as a whole, but the partnership benefits the company as a whole, because, our team and their team now have specific officers and detectives they can call who will take the calls because of the support we gave.
Totally agree with you, Ann. The idea now that particular one was like incident driven in the partnerships with law enforcement. But when you think about it, it's great to have those partnerships with law enforcement agents before you actually need them. Right.
100%.
So number one, I mean, the partnership it's the right thing to do, straight up. But that being said, just building those relationships in any way you can, understanding who your local partners are, it's just good. It's just good for business.
Absolutely. And then it's the proactive approach to it too, leveraging your systems to ensure that, teams aren't entering by themselves, leaving by themselves. A big one, locking the doors at close. Not taking the trash out the back door after dusk if that's your policy. Because the reality is you can put all of these in place, but if you don't verify them and train to them, you are going to be sued when there's an incident for failure to maintain proper security levels.
Right. I mean, it's that old adage, right? Like, inspect what you expect.
Exactly.
Like, it's just, validation, video validation. So can you think of any other departments, again, across multiple verticals, about partnerships to turn your CCTV program into a profit center? Anything else come to mind?
I really can, just other areas in that field operations piece. We do checks to, ensure trainings of new district managers to ensure that their focus is not on a laptop, but on the team. The biggest thing is really, don't always go look for the problem. Understand why you have a problem. So take a look at your restaurants. If you have a sudden reduction in sales, take a look at your retail. If you have a sudden drop in your audits, your piece audits, understand the whys. If they suddenly scale back, or they're not placing the team members are up in the front counters on their phones and nobody's watching the fitting rooms, you're gonna lose merchandise. If team members aren't proactively trained on approaching, guests and saying, hey, can I help you with those 11 pairs of jeans you have behind the counter, right, that you're hiding? I have a great shirt that would go with this. It's about that proactive. Don't teach your folks to go and stop shoplifters, because that's how people get hurt. There's an easy way of proactively doing it and saying, hey, can I help you? No, I'll be right over here watching to see if you need my help.
Right.
But there's just so many ways of proactively doing it to help support the teams and, leverage that positive. So you're not chasing. Why would you not want to leverage technology to understand why, fix it, and move on to the next challenge?
Yeah. Great conversation. Really, really appreciate it. Again, I think that, when you think about building a CCTV program, just, we talked about it, right? Understand what are you trying to solve for? What are you trying to solve for? Do you have the resources to solve it? Get the funding initially, but also remember that it is, I'm going to say, a crawl, walk, run process. Right?
Absolutely.
And this end piece that we're talking about turning into a profit center is really the run process, right? I have everything in
100%.
place. Now, how do I make the best of it? How do I partner with, how do I become that great business partner and say, yes, I've invested this money. Let's all work on this together to ultimately benefit the bottom line and the P&L of, the company that we work for.
Of course. And Kathy, in closing, you'll have a lot of your viewers say, well, I don't have the technology and they aren't giving me the money. And I faced that at CKE. I had camera systems I couldn't connect to, I couldn't hold a stream, and I had a reduction in staff. But I pulled, like I said, I hired great RLPNs. I pulled them together and said, this is what we have to work with. We need to show them why we need a better product. And within 1 year, not only did we increase our team, but we were handed a check for $1.8 million to buy cameras, because we were able to figure out and show those little baby steps,
Right.
The crawl walk. And then when they handed us the check, we ran with it.
Yeah. And sometimes to your point, that example, sometimes you're in it for it's the long game, right?
Absolutely.
There's sometimes you're sitting around the table and you get the funding right away, but more often than not, it's prove it. I'll give you a little bit more, prove it. I'll give
Exactly. Anybody can do it.
Yep, absolutely. So, Anne, again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you and sharing your knowledge with our listeners.
Absolutely, my pleasure. We love your product. Take care.
Thank you.